And as long as there's the promise of amnesty, believe me, there will be illegal immigration. As long as there's the promise that illegals can get in front of the line and get free medical care and free education, there will be illegal immigration. If we had a healthy, thriving economy, and the immigration problem, I believe, would be minimal. Because there's no reason why we can't be generous. We have been generous in the past. It's because of the deterioration of our economic system that when people see individuals coming and they know they're illegals and they're on food stamps, they're in the schools, and they become an economic burden, that is where the resentment builds. So immigration is related to our economic policies, and the worse the economy gets, the more hostility there will be. And the last thing we need is to have this conflict and worry about how to deal with illegals. What we want to do is have the healthy, thriving economy so we can be generous and open with our immigration programs. But when we look at national sovereignty, we also see a move in this country toward a North American Union. I strongly reject the idea of a North American Union. I believe that we should defend national sovereignty. And if we want to really protect national sovereignty, we would talk about some of the international entangling alliances that we're involved in. I see no benefit for us to be in the United Nations. And if we weren't in the United Nations and accepting this role of entangling alliances, we wouldn't have to be subsidizing way out of proportion the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO or the NAFTA or CAFTA. These programs do not serve our interests. Does that mean that we should be a closed society, that we should be isolated from the world? No, I don't believe so one minute. What we need to do is defend ourselves, but be friends with other countries as the founders advised, and we will do much better. We can get our budget in balance, and we can maintain trade and friendship with the world, and we're going to have less likelihood of going to war. So this is what we really want. We want to promote freedom, because if you promote freedom and you understand it, and we understand the Constitution, we're going to have peace. Not perfect, but a lot more peace. And if we have peace, then we will have prosperity. If we don't understand freedom and we end up in more wars and constant wars and attack on our liberties, we will not have prosperity. And that is what we're facing, and that is what the next generation is inheriting. And it's not their fault. But what we need to do is devise a system where we can develop a transition. I'm talking about saving hundreds of billions of dollars in the various programs. Do we really need a Department of Education? Does that help us in any way? There's a place to save a lot of money. If we saved an adequate amount of money, we could actually get the budget in balance, start cutting the deficit, restore confidence to the dollar. At the same time, we can still take care of the people in need that we can't just put out in the street. But what we have to have is an opportunity for the next generation to work their way out of the system. There's no reason in the world, if we did the right things, why you as young people couldn't get out of the Social Security system. The Social Security system is not viable. There's no money there. But we are obligated to do our very best to take care of the individuals who are dependent on Social Security. But the runaway inflation will make it impossible unless we get our budget under control. But eventually we have to move away. In the same way on the monetary system. I don't advocate closing down the Federal Reserve in 1 or 2 days. At least take a week or two. But no, you can actually have competing currencies. In this day and age, it's happening all the time. Why don't we have this astoundingly new idea? Let's just legalize the Constitution and have competition. There's no reason why we couldn't pick and choose the currency we want. They do it around the world all the time. And the Constitution says gold and silver should be money. And we could do that, and then if sound money does better than paper money, then maybe the Federal Reserve will be put out of business. So there are ways to work these programs out. The same way, the educational system. I don't like the federal government involved. We passed a massive bill just yesterday dealing with a lot more money going into the federal control of education. But in the meantime, what we have to do is allow people an option. I'd like to get rid of the whole tax code and the income tax, but in the meantime, what I would do is if you're in private schools, if you're supplementing even somebody in public school or you're a homeschooler, that you can get all your money back off your tax return to take care of your own needs, and you would be in charge of your education. This to me is one of the most important things we do, is to encourage competition in education. That is why this university is so important, because you truly are, the competition against the establishment. Ultimately, the solution to our problems will come through education. We as politicians offer very little. Politicians generally are a reflection of a prevailing attitude. And this university, in these few decades, have had a tremendous influence already. This is very important because you have to change attitudes. You have to get people in teaching positions, into the media, into the government, and in all these positions. And as you do this, then there will be a reflection and a change. Politicians don't change anything. Politicians are merely puppets to conventional wisdom. And this is why your university is so important. But we need a lot of universities. We need to get it out of the hands of the government. Just think, not too many decades ago, the major universities and the major hospitals were started by churches and maintained by churches. But there's essentially none that do it. They still have church names to it. But they're totally dependent on government largesse and government regulations and government inflation. We as a people, unfortunately, have lost our faith and confidence in understanding how freedom works, how our government was put together, and how local government was supposed to be so much better than centralized government. We are dependent now on centralized control. Just think of the failure of our federal government to deal with the disaster in New Orleans. People say, well, it was mismanagement. Well, sure, it was mismanagement, but big government always mismanages things. That is the problem. In 1900, our worst natural disaster in this history occurred in the district I represent now, in Galveston, Texas. Over 6,000 individuals were killed. But who took care of Galveston at that time? There was no FEMA, no Department of Homeland Security, no centralized economic planning. Texas took care of it. Galveston took care of it. They rebuilt the city, raised the city up, and built a seawall. But today, we depend on the federal government and central economic planners for everything. So it is time that we have revived once again the spirit that made America great and understand how it works, because it can work and it should work, and that's our only option. Because if we continue in this direction, we're going to have less freedoms, we're going to have less prosperity, and it looks like we're going to have perpetual war until it's too late, until we really come to a point where America could disappear, which is the last thing we want and the last thing I care for, and the reason why I have been involved for so many years. 30 years ago,